Hello and welcome to the Sidebar, presented by True Crime Daily, taking you inside the courtrooms of high-profile and notorious cases from across the country. I'm your host, Joshua Ritter. I'm a criminal defense lawyer based in Los Angeles and previously an LA County prosecutor for nearly a decade. You can find me on all social media at Joshua Ritter ESQ or at joshuaritter.com. We are recording this on Friday, May 17th, 2024. In this week's episode, a wealthy socialite is now seeking to overturn her murder conviction after the prosecutors who convicted her are removed from the case following a criminal indictment against their supervisor. Plus, shocking new allegations against a mother charged with poisoning her husband as prosecutors seek to extend the preliminary hearing to a 3-day event. But first, the defense now faces an uphill battle in the murder trial of an alleged Doomsday prophet after the prosecution has finally rested their case. Today, we are joined by Joseph Scott Morgan, a former death investigator, forensic expert, and host of the popular podcast Body Bags with Joseph Morgan, and also a friend of the show. Joseph, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, Joshua. So good to see you.
It's good to see you too. It's been a while, which is all my fault, and I'm sorry about that. I always look forward to our conversations. Have you got any new projects or anything you've been up to lately you'd like to share with us?
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm bouncing around. My problem is, Joshua, I think in the world that we're in, I have a really hard. Maybe I need therapy. I have a real hard time saying no to anyone, and so yeah. But Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan is going just gangbusters. We passed our our 205th episode.
Wow.
We drop 3 episodes per week now.
Wow.
And so I'm very proud of that. We're on all platforms, everything from Amazon to iHeart to, Apple and Spotify. And love doing it because it's a platform to teach forensics to people that don't have an opportunity to go to school and have the advantages I've had in my life to study in a formal. And so many people have questions about forensics, and I try to keep the scope very narrow. And we have lively discussions about essentially current cases. But boy, I tell you, I love doing history cases. I just did John Wilkes Booth a couple of weeks ago on the anniversary of his death, and we've done Abe Lincoln and Julius Caesar and those sorts of things. So we have a lot of fun in that. Yeah. Actually, Julius Caesar is the first recorded autopsy. And so in history, so that was I enjoy doing those. So we have a lot of fun with it, and I'm very happy to have the opportunity to interact with the public and talk about forensics.
Awesome. Well, if to all listening and watching, if you have not checked out Body Bags, do yourself the favor and check it out. I thoroughly enjoy it because I tell you, there's a lot of true crime podcasts, but there's none that handle things quite like Joseph does. So I highly recommend it. Check it out. And for that reason, he's on the show to talk about these cases this week because I know he follows them closely and has some unique insights on them. So let's jump right in. Out of Ada County, Idaho, after 24 days and 68 witnesses, prosecutors have at long last rested their case in the murder trial of an alleged doomsday prophet accused of using his fringe religious beliefs to justify the murders of 2 young children and his first wife. Chad Daybell faces 3 first-degree murder charges for the death of his first wife, Tammy Daybell, as well as the deaths of J.J. Vallow and Tylee Ryan, the children of Chad's second wife, convicted killer Lori Vallow. Prosecutors closed their presentation in dramatic fashion with a previously unheard jailhouse phone call between Daybell and Vallow, recorded shortly after Vallow's arrest. In the taped conversation, Daybell and Vallow discuss a, quote, project, with Vallow questioning when it would reach its conclusion, and Daybell reassures Vallow that the blueprints are still intact, despite numerous complications. The day following the conversation, the bodies of JJ and Tylee were discovered on Daybell's property. After the prosecution rested their case, Daybell's defense filed a motion to dismiss the charges against Daybell, claiming that the state had not met their burden for the counts. This motion was ultimately unsuccessful, and the trial is set to continue with Daybell's defense presenting their case by the time you're listening to this. Joseph, I know that you've been following this case closely, and I know because it has such a significant forensic element to it that
Yeah.
it's of great interest to you, not only the rest of the country as well. Just kind of give me your thoughts on how do you think the prosecution did. And this is an interesting case because we can kind of compare it to the prosecution of Lori Vallow. But
Right.
do you feel like they've met their burden, or is there a little question you think that might remain in jurors' minds at this point?
Opportunity and access, I think, are a big, a big player in all of this. In this case, and you're right, Joshua, I've followed this since the beginning, and I've known the grandparents,
Wow.
and have met them several times. And just on a personal side note, it's uh, and I know as a former prosecutor and as a defense attorney, uh, you've experienced seeing the pain on people's
Yeah.
faces, in that real time. This is
Yeah.
not Hollywood. And the grandparents have borne such a burden through these many years now, you know.
Yeah.
And you really see the human side of this. And for me as the forensic guy, I've watched it very carefully, have commented, tape shows, and for for me, I think looking at what the prosecution did, I think they've met their responsibilities here. They put on the full court press with this. They I think sports metaphor again, they pushed it across the goal line. As far as I'm concerned, they've done everything that they can at this point. I think the interesting thing to watch here, though, is going to be how the defense parries in this particular instance, in from the broader perspective. And of course, we all know who the sacrificial lamb in this thing is going to be. It's going to be Alex Cox. They'll keep
Yeah.
going back to him and back to him and back to him. And again, you have physical evidence. One of those major bits of physical evidence, which I think was a late print from Alex Cox that was found on the bags
Yeah.
relative to JJ and that precious child that was the horror of that is something I don't know that any of us can actually plumb. But that is going to be, I think that probably is going to be one of the linchpins. And I'm speaking, again, as a forensics guy, that's what I'm looking at relative to this. And it's always been about Alex. He was essentially the foil, if you will. And he's gone. And how convenient, for both Vallow and Daybell in these circumstances. And there seems to be these little markers along the way throughout the through line on every bit of this that there were these moments of opportunity for them that just boggle the mind, and but yet they kept stepping upon themselves all along. Now, of course, that's what eventually got them caught in that. And look, what you mentioned, Joshua, is brilliant. This idea of this project. That's
Hmm.
really hard. And I know a lot of this stuff is circumstantial, but when you see, I think the totality of this, when you see the project that has been brought to fruition, when you distill it down to these two precious children, and let's don't forget Tammy either, please. I mean, that's important to remember as well. When you distill it down to that and you see the quote unquote project, and only, that can be implied that that's what's at work here. And the police were onto this. It sickens us to our core, particularly when you look at the remains of Tylee and what was done to her. I don't think that we'll ever really know what her cause of death was, but just a human to human event, the way they treated her remains in death is something that is the absolute stuff of nightmares, Joshua.
Yeah. Yeah. Well put. You mentioned how the defense might try to parry from this, and I want to get into that. But first, I want to talk about that. I think it was brilliant the way that the prosecution ended their case with this last phone call, because
Yeah,
one of the strategies I believe that the defense is going to do is try to attack the premeditation and planning ahead of time, because
Right, right.
they may have a problem with him knowing what took place afterwards, but they could
Yes,
argue, listen, he found out about this horrible thing his wife had done, and then he helped her kind of cover it up, but he's not
right.
responsible for first degree premeditated murder. But this phone call, when they're talking about blueprints and the project and the I believe they even refer to Cox as the contractor or something. They that to me, and I think the jury's going to see right through it, but that to me shows premeditation is about as clear as it's been shown in this case, and it's coming from the defendant's own mouth, these words. They're hearing that, the jurors, from his own mouth, which to me is always super impactful on a jury, is to hear from the defendant, whether that's the defendant taking the stand, the defendant in a police interrogation, or some sort of surreptitiously recorded phone call. Words out of their mouth having a tremendous impact. Do you think this could was it enough to push the prosecution, or actually was it enough to close the door on the defense arguments that this was not premeditated?
Yeah, I think that it probably is. And here's another thing, I think, and there's a term that you guys in law use, and forgive me, I know it varies from state to state, perhaps, but it's this kind of depraved mind or depraved heart. I can't
Yeah,
remember. There's a term, and you know, look, we're those human beings that are sitting in that jury box there, and everybody that's in attendance in court. Uh, you know, they put these things together, and that depraved element, the callousness, I think, what uh, a splendid or remarkable way to end their portion, the prosecution. And yeah, I think that was very, very powerful because I know you guys create, and when you guys are creating a case, um, to present, there is, I used the term through line earlier. There is a through line. There's a method to the madness here. And to be, I don't know of any case I remember recently where it has been so succinctly tied up, and it was like a grand flourish,
mm-hmm.
to put, the proverbial cherry on top of this thing. The defense has got a mountain to climb here, in my opinion. Now, we've been proved wrong in the past, but in this particular case, I think that they've gone above and beyond at this point in time. And boy, have we waited a long time for all of this. And I'm going to be fascinated to see how the defense moves forward, because it's going to be very, very difficult. I'll also be interested to see what type of defense witnesses they're going to be putting on the
Yeah,
stand to uh, try to negate some of these strikes that the prosecution. If you look at it from the perspective of a boxing match, they're wounded and bleeding right now, and it's
yeah,
going to be interesting to see how they defense this.
yeah. I agree, and I see this similarly that you do. That I believe they've more than met their burden.
Yeah,
And add to that what you were talking about earlier, the horrific elements of this case, the heartbreak, the
yeah,
taking of the lives of children, and in a way that it looks like they may have suffered before they lost their lives.
yeah. Can I make one
You,
point about that real
please,
quick? Because one of the
please.
most powerful moments for me, and God bless this guy, the pathologist that got on the stand. And Joshua, do you remember him talking? And forgive me, his name escapes me right now, but I'd actually talked about this in class at the university where I teach. Um, he remarked that he saw what appeared to be scratches on
Yes.
JJ's neck. I don't know. Again, reflecting back, we covered so many cases. I really don't recall something that was this powerful. And I think that many people, it's kind of an innocuous thing, but when he's talking about the scratches that are on JJ's neck, the implication is
Yeah.
he had an awareness. For so long they put forth the theory that he had been drugged, and I don't know if you recall that, but they had talked about he had been possibly medicated, and he had been drugged and all these sorts of things. And he was supposed to be on medication, but I think the idea was he had been slipped something lethal. This child had an awareness, Joshua, and
Yeah.
that goes to this. And apparently, in forensics, what we look for relative to injuries to bodies, we assess them from the perspective of antemortem, perimortem, which means in the throes of death, to postmortem. These are antemortem insults that he has on his neck, and apparently self-generated. So the pathologist acted in a very powerful moment. This guy actually says it could be consistent with him trying to free himself from this bag. And
Yeah.
just let that sink in and get into your groundwater just for a second. This kid, he's being deprived of oxygen. He has an awareness of it. One of the first things that my mind kind of flew to in this was, and you have to entertain it, was he buried alive?
Yeah.
Was that taking place, in a subterranean sense, after they've placed him in this hole adjacent to this old retention pond that's actually in view of where Tylee's remains had been desecrated. Um, and again, that goes to the horror of this, like the
Yeah.
callousness of it. And it's not just against children, it's against her children, her children as a parent.
Yeah.
And he's part and parcel of this. Chad Daybell is. In my opinion, this is a confederacy that they've entered into.
Yeah. The way that the prosecution needs to lay that out in closing arguments, if it didn't have the kind of impact that you've been outlining for us here to the jurors yet, is that that young man was clawing at the restraints around his neck
Yeah,
to try to save his own life, and that the last moments of this young man's life were filled with panic and
yes,
terror, and perhaps even the realization that the people responsible for this were his own mother and the only people in the world that he expected to care and protect for him. That, I mean,
absolutely.
it's hard to even think about that without breaking down. And I'll tell you this: legal arguments aside, it is going to take a nearly impossible undertaking on the
Yeah,
part of the defense for them to convince them to walk someone who may have been involved in that horrific of an act. So, if we're talking about what does the defense do next, I have no idea. I know that they are not restrained as much as Lori Vallow seems to have put her attorneys under. I think they're going to go after Lori. I think they're going to go after Alex Cox. I think they're
oh
going to
yeah,
try to place the blame everywhere else and say this man was just a preacher and these people took it way too far. But I'm telling you right now, the jurors, when they start to understand that the way that you have just explained it, they're going to have a real tough time walking anybody out the door and not holding him responsible for
I
that.
agree.
But
I agree. They're going to want justice here.
yeah,
We throw that term around a lot, but people want justice.
yeah, yeah. Well, like we said, that case is continuing. By the time we're recording this and by the time it's released, they'll probably be into their case. And so we'll know about the witnesses they are calling, but we will continue to follow it.
As a True Crime Daily listener, you know the world can be a dangerous and unpredictable place. With every case that I've covered, I've learned one thing. Your best line of defense is your vigilance and your preparation. That's why I recommend Simply Safe Home Security. We hear stories every day, whether it's in the Nextdoor app or in a neighborhood group, of homes being broken into. It may happen while the homeowners are on vacation or sometimes even when they're home. But Simply Safe can help give you peace of mind. Named Best Home Security Systems of 2024 by U.S. News and World Report, Simply Safe can protect your home, your whole home, with sensors to detect break-ins, fires, floods, and more. It has a variety of indoor and outdoor cameras, and it is backed by 24/7 professional monitoring for less than $1 a day. Plus, there are no contracts and a 60-day money-back guarantee. Simply Safe has given me and many of our listeners real peace of mind. I want you to have it too. Get 20% off any new Simply Safe system when you sign up for Fast Protect monitoring. Just visit simplysafe.com/truecrime. That's simplysafe.com/truecrime. There's no safe like Simply Safe.
In the meantime, let's jump over to Los Angeles, California, where a wealthy socialite convicted of murder awaits sentencing. Her appeal may be building momentum as the prosecutors who secured her conviction are removed from the case. Rebecca Grossman was convicted of 2 counts of second-degree murder for the deaths of Mark and Jacob Iskander, who were struck by her vehicle at high speed while using the crosswalk. The removal of the prosecutors in the case comes after Assistant DA Diana Tarrin, who supervised the prosecution, was charged with, get this, multiple felony counts for allegedly misusing confidential law enforcement records. Grossman's attorney, James Spertus, who was hired after Grossman's conviction, is seeking a new trial for the socialite. However, Spertus is also representing Tarrin in her felony case, creating a direct conflict of interest. The parents of the victims told media outlets that they were blindsided by the removal of the prosecutors who have been with them since the children were killed in 2020. The parents believe that Grossman knowingly hired Spertus because of his connection to Tarrin, seeking to undercut the prosecution should this case return to trial. This is a little inside baseball, Joseph, here in Los Angeles, but I just want to get your thoughts.
Yeah.
George Gascon has been a highly controversial figure since he took office in 2020. And now we're in the lead up to an election year.
Yep.
And one of his top advisors is indicted on 11 felony counts for illegally accessing police records. The fallout from this is going to be huge, but we're now seeing its effects downstream on other cases where these prosecutors got removed. Do you think, though, I guess, is this all just kind of noise surrounding this, or do you think it actually gives the defense some sort of ammunition here on appeal?
Of course it does. Absolutely. And again, this thing is like throwing I've never been involved directly in a case where there was alleged prosecutorial misconduct, where it led to, I have had friends that have been involved in these kind of cases. And from an investigative standpoint, it's very frustrating. And you begin to think about all the hard work and the hours that you put in, just trying to track leads down and put together the evidence to present to the prosecutor. And then essentially everything that you've done is essentially taken in the backyard and somebody throws a match to it and burns it to the ground. And it's a domino effect with all these. And there's a couple of cases like this on the forensic side around the country. There have been, events where lab technicians, for instance, there was pretty famous one up in the Northeast where you had a DNA analyst that was doing inappropriate sampling on things. And all of those cases that she was involved in get burned to the ground.
Wasn't there something in Colorado recently?
Yeah.
I remember reading something about this, that going back decades, they're going to have to review their cases.
Yeah. And so anytime you do that, I know this sounds very old fashioned. All right. But just follow me here.
Go for
it. There is a reason why we are held in forensics to a particularly high standard, and this extends not just legally but morally. Anything that we do that is untoward can be used in order to dismantle something. So you have to be very, very careful. And when you get into a position where you are being reckless to this point, it compromises everything. And my God, Josh, I got to tell you, I started covering this case on Nancy Grace's show. God, I don't know. It seems like could it have been 2 years ago? I can't
Yeah.
remember.
Yeah, I
And
believe it
I
took
just,
place in 2020.
yeah, and I just remember talking about the injuries to these children. These parents have been languishing all of this time. And we can talk about people's political careers and what their goals are and how this is going to harm them. But when and you know this because you've worked as a prosecutor, you sit across the table from loved ones and they're looking to you, and they are in the most vulnerable state that any human being can be in. I mean, they are open and bleeding before you. They just want some level of hope. And that the comment that the parents made relative to, I we we didn't see this coming.
Yeah.
And and here's the thing, those two parents bore witness to this event occur before
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
That's what's so hard about this. They saw this physically, they saw the actions of what this woman did in real time. They tried to save their children by, you know, attempting to stem bleeding, to make them comfortable, to assess them, all these, and it was for naught. And here they are. It's not like it's some kind of abstract thing where these children have been kidnapped and something, and they're
Right.
found in some. This is very visceral, and that's what's so painful about this for family members, and I would imagine to a great extent to everybody in their circle, in that area, their friends that have been around these children for years and years, that knew them, knew what kind of family they were. Out for a walk, man. They were just
Yeah.
out for a walk. And when this kind of thing happens, boy, it rocks people to their core.
Yeah. 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 It's, I hadn't thought about it the way that you just put it, but we talk about a lot of very tragic cases on this channel, but it's rare that you hear about folks living completely innocent, not high risk lives,
Oh no.
witnessing the loss of their children
Yeah.
in front of them. You're right. This isn't some event that it took place and they're hearing about it. And that's tragic. I'm not trying to take away from the
No.
heartbreak and tragedy of that, but the
Yeah.
idea that they were there as this took place is just I can't fathom it. If I start to try to imagine it, it is too much for my psyche to start to handle. And just how life can change in a moment, in the blink of an eye.
Yeah.
Your whole happy life is turned completely upside down. And now, like you said, continuing to kind of relive the nightmare of this because it just doesn't ever seem to come to rest with these new developments. And so you're right.
That's
Prosecutors, investigators, uh, everyone involved in the criminal justice system, certainly from the side of pursuing justice, really needs to hold themselves to a higher standard and should be held because of what hangs in the balance. So
I think just one more comment. I,
please,
I, I think I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall in the traffic investigation unit when just those folks there that handled that investigation.
yeah,
There's something about handling, and this is almost rote, I know, forgive me, but when you deal with children in particular, um, I can only imagine in their squad when they're sitting there and they're discussing this and they put their heart and soul into this thing and doing their examinations and everything. And now they're faced with this. I
yeah,
can, I won't speculate any further than that, but I'll put it to you this way. The conversations would have been very, very interesting within that squad relative to all of this hard work and essentially what could turn out to be a failure to serve these victims on the part of the prosecutor's office.
yeah. And across that office, I mean, this is one of, I'm sure, hundreds of cases that this is going to play an issue with. You have
Yeah,
a supervisor.
a collective chill has
Yeah,
gone up everybody's
exactly.
spine, I can tell you.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, we will, of course, continue to keep tabs on this case and let you know how this all plays out. Let's finally move to Park City, Utah, where a woman charged with poisoning her husband will have to wait a bit longer before a judge determines if there is sufficient evidence to hold her to face trial. Corey Richens faces a number of charges related to the death of her husband, Eric Richens, after the man ingested an amount of fentanyl 5 times the lethal dose. Richens, who wrote a book on coping with the loss of a loved one soon after Eric's death, allegedly had fallen into nearly $3 million in debt, and according to prosecutors, intended to use her husband's life insurance policy to resuscitate her floundering real estate business. Her preliminary hearing was scheduled for May 15th. However, a judge issued a continuance after her defense attorney made a blanket objection to relevancy of much of the evidence prosecutors intended to use against her. This new hearing is now expected to last 3 days. Prosecutors claim that Richens not only had financial motives to kill her husband, but that she was also having an affair at the time of the death and was afraid to divorce Eric for fear of losing her children. The preliminary hearing is now scheduled for June 18th, and we will, of course, keep you updated. This is a little bit of a bizarre development to me, and maybe you have some insight on this or can give me your thoughts, but the idea that the defense is objecting to relevance or admissibility of some evidence should come as a shock to absolutely no one. And so it seems as though they came in, said, we're objecting to all of this. I know there was even some of their argument had to do with, this is character evidence and everything else. But the idea that the judge is saying and the prosecution is now asking to put this off so that they can handle this seems like, why wasn't this all hashed out ahead of time? Didn't everyone see this coming? I don't know. What are your thoughts?
The fact, and I think that you had mentioned at some point in time, and I like this term, a mini trial and a preliminary hearing.
Yeah.
Which is not is not obviously, I know I'm preaching to the choir here. It's not for the purposes of prosecuting. It's for the purposes of trying to discover if there's enough evidence.
Right.
From my perspective, forensics, there are cases out there with a lot less forensic evidence that have led to a conviction. And let me, just so that your audience understands, you talked about 5 times the lethal level. Just so we are all on the same sheet of music, Joshua, relative to fentanyl, which, by the way, as we all know, is an absolute scourge in this country. So roughly 2 milligrams of fentanyl is lethal. All right.
And I don't want to cut you off, but explain to us how small 2 milligrams is.
If we were to take it and if you had it in crystal form, it would be essentially, I guess probably the closest thing I could say, it would be essentially 2 grains of the head of a pin, about the size of the head of a pin. All right.
That's what I think is the mind-blowing thing is you're talking grains of sand type stuff. Yeah.
And to compare it, and I know you've worked cases like this over the years, Joshua, with a heroin overdose, the lethal amount can vary with heroin, but kind of, what people don't understand about drugs, every drug out there, even fentanyl, because fentanyl has a legitimate use. It's been used for pain regulation, that sort of thing, for years and years. It's nothing new under the sun.
Right.
But every drug has a therapeutic level. Okay. So, and scientists have determined that, okay, if you stay beneath the ceiling, you're okay. All right. Now, a lot of that's heavily dependent upon other, but if you just look at heroin and you compare it to fentanyl, okay, heroin, which we all know is horrific, it takes the range on it for lethality, and a lot of it is dependent upon the dependency level of the individual ingesting this or being subjected to it, injected, ranges from 30 milligrams up to 500 milligrams. So if you're heroin dependent, it's going to take a lot more to push you over the edge. I don't see in any universe at all that this man was fentanyl dependent. All right. And so what does that say? Well, I guess it could be if a prosecutor were to take that narrative and run through with it and say, well, there was certainly what I think could be qualified as lethal intent here,
Yeah.
because she would understand. She's got a history with the stuff. She knows people. I mean, who thinks about this so-called, and she's been framed as a Christian writer, I think at some point. How does a Christian writer even know how to access this drug that is out there? Where do you go to fetch this, if you will?
Right.
And that's an interesting thing to think about. And then you give the guy that you have children with a Moscow Mule, vodka. So you're mixing vodka and fentanyl, and you're giving him 5 times the lethal level. How do you have access? Well, you certainly got opportunity. So that's a big driver. And the fact that they would ask for, I don't know, do you even frame this as a continuance? You're a lawyer. I'm curious about this. They put this thing off. They're talking about, and we're just talking about a preliminary hearing, and we haven't even discussed,
Yeah.
internet searches after she, collection of, what was it? Collection of monies owed in the absence of a death certificate. I think that was when, and I'm paraphrasing, that was like one of the searches on there that they have.
Right.
Oh my gosh.
Right.
It's absolutely, I'm not trying to laugh here. I mean, it's mind blowing.
Yeah. Well, to go to your point too about the amount of fentanyl used and what does that say about her intent, I believe there is evidence that they intend to present that she had attempted this at a previous date, that he had made statements to a friend or coworker that, I think my wife tried to kill me. He felt like he may have been poisoned. And I don't know if that evidence is going to come out or not, but
I don't know. It was I think it was like a sandwich on Valentine's
maybe,
Day or something.
Yeah, it was
something
close
like
to
that.
Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
But the point being, if you're trying to show premeditation and first degree murder and you've got elements that she may have tried this before and it didn't work, well, like she's going to get it done with the sledgehammer the second time around, like the way you pointed out. There is no way she intends for this man to survive this attempt on his life. Yeah.
He's leaving the house on a gurney. There's no way that he is going to escape at this point in time, and that can be implied. And we don't, who in the world knows what her specific intent was. I guess the defense can argue any number of things, but the fact that the life that this guy led it seems incompatible with someone that would have been fentanyl dependent. And I think, and this is kind of a creepy thing here thinking about this. In your opinion, do you think that the defense could attempt to impugn him in any way? I think that might be on the table here.
I think 100%. I think that's exactly where this is going. That they're just going to try to say that he had all sorts of hidden issues that nobody knew about, and he was, and to their point, or to your point, if the lethal dose for fentanyl is so small, well, then how easily could somebody miscalculate an overdose on it? And that's where they're going to go, is that he had drug problems and he just unfortunately took way too much. But with all of this other evidence, as you pointed out, with the procuring of the drugs, with her attempts beforehand, with the internet searches, the financial interest, all of that, I think the prosecution case is looking like it's squaring up to be pretty strong. But again, we're not going to find out until later in June, so we'll have to wait. To me, this is one of the more fascinating cases that's currently being litigated right now. But we're not going to hear much more about it until about a month from now in late June. But in the meantime, that is our show. Joseph, thank you so much again for coming on this week. Tell us again where people can find out more about you.
Well, first off, I teach at Jacksonville State University. That's not Jacksonville, Florida. It's Jacksonville, Alabama. We're about 90 miles west of Atlanta on the I-20 corridor. We have a forensic investigations program, which I'm a professor in that program. So check us out on the web at jsu.edu. And then my podcast is Body Bags, with Joseph Scott Morgan, and it's on iHeart, Apple, Spotify, and Amazon. So find us there. Please, if you're on Apple, please give us a rating and review. We really
Yeah.
appreciate that. And for those of you that might be attending CrimeCon, I'll be there in just a couple of
fantastic.
weeks up in Nashville. Yeah, talking
Fantastic.
about family annihilators this time. So that's going to be an interesting talk.
Excellent. And everyone, do yourselves a favor and check out Body Bags, please. It's well worth a listen. I'm your host, Josh Ritter. You can catch me on Instagram and Twitter, or at Joshua Ritter ESQ, or at joshuaritter.com. You can find our Sidebar episodes wherever you get your podcasts, and we would love to hear from you. If you've got questions or comments you'd like us to address, please tweet us your questions with the hashtag TCD Sidebar. And thank you for joining us at the True Crime Daily Sidebar.